Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Mind Sculptors. I am your host, Callahan, and my goodness, it's been a long 2 weeks, but I'm glad to be back, and we've got a great show lined up for you all today. But before we get into it, just want to take a moment to remind you that if you do like this episode or any of the other episodes here on the Mind Sculptors, please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below. If you want access to our Discord server, as well as some extra, I don't want to say content because we don't upload content there very consistently, but some extra stuff. Sometimes we release polls on what to make and yada, yada, yada. Make sure to head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/themindsculptors, or you can just check out the link in the description as well. Today, I have, again, being my lovely co-host, my fellow Sculpty boy Scoots is joining me today. Scoots, how you doing today?
Good, thanks. How are you?
My voice is better than it was on Sunday and Monday, but still recovering. So
Sounds lovely as usual.
Yeah. I was not capable of not sounding like this on Sunday and Monday. But also joining us again is your Commander Mechanic, Chris. Chris, how you doing today?
Cal, I'm fantastic. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. Always a pleasure. Love having you on. And also returning, I think this is actually, is this the first time on the podcast for you? Okay. First time on the podcast is Dan, otherwise known as Moderately Anonymous MTG. Actually, no, it's not the first time you've been on the podcast, technically, because you presented during the award show.
That's true. Yes, actually, I did do that. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
That was on the podcast.
So technically, you have been on before. But so today we're going to be talking about, again, going to be looking more at the MLC Draft. And really, the way that Marchesa 2022's results are going to be influencing it, because by golly, I mean, I was there. People were talking about it. Like, literally, when people were not talking about Marchesa, they were talking about the MLC. So, which was really cool for me.
Yeah.
So when we look at this, one of the first things I want to look at here is the fact that I mess this up every time. How was it you said his name was, Scoots?
I think it's Coibito.
Coibito. Okay. If we are mispronouncing your name, I apologize. So they won Marchesa 2022 with Magda Brazen Outlaw, which, as we talked about on our last episode, it looks like Nick is pretty committed to taking as his first pick.
Yep.
Now, with that being said, this is a deck that has really jumped up onto a lot of radars since then. And so, Scoots, for some people who are unfamiliar with Magda and what it's doing, I know this is a deck that you're a little bit more familiar with. How does this deck win things? Because I think a really good example is in the Marchesa finals. The reason it won was a blind, or what was it? What was it that got abrupt decayed?
It was activated abilities cost 2 more.
Suppression field.
Suppression field. A suppression field got destroyed from Charles's board, and the Druid player was planning to win with their, Druid stuff as they were, and they did not realize that Magda can just win at instant speed.
Yeah.
So Scoots, walk us through a little bit on how this deck works and what it's doing exactly.
Sure. So Magda is it's a layered combo deck, and it uses either artifact creatures or cards like Liquid Metal Torque to make another dwarf an artifact. The big thing that Magda players love is Universal Automaton, because it's a 1-drop artifact dork. And you net 5 treasures somehow, whether via Dockside or via tapping dwarves over a series of turns. And then you put a search on the stack by sacrificing 5 of those treasures, and you generally get something like Clock of Omens.
Yep.
And then you tap the Universal Automaton to make a treasure. Then you tap the treasure that you tap the Clock of Omens to untap the artifact dwarf. and then you repeat this process over and over until you make a huge amount of tapped treasures, and from there you can put searches on the stack for, I think it's like, it depends on the list, but it could be like Cloudstone Curio and Scourge of Valkis, and there's like a bunch of different dragon or artifact based lines you can do. Some people do Spine of Ishsa loops, and there's a lot of different things you can do, but it is a deck that can, with 5 treasures in play, win on the stack.
And through a Rule of Law.
Yeah, and through Rule of Law, very notably, can win on the... And honestly, until it gets to a certain point, if you can, with Magda, if you have 10 treasures and there's even like a Null Rod in play, you can get something that removes the Null Rod and then go off over top of that too with the Clock of Moments ability.
Yeah. Yep. The deck is very, very, like it is important to note. This is a very good list, right? Like
it's very well constructed. Mm-hmm. And the thing about the list that won Marchesa is it was 33 cards different from the deck on the cEDH database. Mm-hmm. So it is a deck that you can put together in a bunch of different ways and still have it be extremely potent.
Right. And we had seen that the list that was at Marchesa differed from the deck database list, but was near identical to
very similar,
the God of Commander tournament.
Japanese God of Commander list, yep. And even the pilot had said that they saw the God of Commander list kind of at the last second and looked to see how they could change the deck up to be reflective of that. So it's really cool. It's one of those decks that there's like so many parallel brewers making this deck, and then you find that eventually someone will coalesce all those ideas into one and get like the correct working Rube Goldberg machine. It's crazy. But.
Right.
So go ahead.
Sorry,
Chris.
That would beg the question from me here. If Nick is still dead set on Magda as number 1 pick here, now that it's got some visibility, now that people know a little bit more about what it's trying to do and how it's interacting, is Nick playing an identical list to the one that won Marchesa? Or is Nick going in and gutting some of those packages?
So, I mean, Nick has his Magda deck that he plays, and I think it's pretty close to the one on the database. But Nick is a heads-up player, and his record in the MLC last year should not be indicative of how good of a Magic player he is. And I mean that. He will definitely go in, see the changes, make changes, and assemble a tighter list, the tightest list that he possibly can. That's just something Nick is going to do.
Yeah, I think you have
and I'm sure there'll be changes. And yeah, I think it was moderately anonymous over there who said that people are definitely going to start reading the Magda primer now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely true.
You might have to maybe get to alter it.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke earlier before we started just a little bit about the Brewer's advantage, which is extremely real. We certainly saw the effects of it in Marchesa, and I think it would not be super wise to assume that you could work that same advantage in this upcoming tournament. I think that definitely you need to go in there and sort of just pull the juke and get some different packages in there. I know that there was a lot of literal dwarves in the Marchesa list,
including vanilla 1/1 for 1 dwarves.
There were like some notable ones
dwarf.
that
Hey, let's be fair.
There are some good
Dwarf
ones.
and Grunt has Mountain Walk, guys. Come on.
There are some ones that blow up non-basic lands, which is not nothing. Like that's one of the better dwarf effects, and that's pretty all right. I think some of them may even blow up artifacts. So some Gorilla Shaman effects.
The
in the world.
The 0-mana morph is there?
Yeah.
There are some semi-defensible dwarfs, the automaton included.
Yeah, for sure, and metallic mimic stuff like that.
But that being said, the point I'm trying to make is that there are a lot of like very flexible slots, and there are a lot of very interesting choices that can be made here. And there's so many things in red that you can play now. The Red March is something that I have been very interested in. I haven't seen it pop up a lot in lists yet, but I think that's a really great card, and I think that we should start seeing more of it, especially for combo based lists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think one of the big benefits is when you can tutor up anything in that deck, you can put anything in the list. You can go completely out of left field, put something that nobody is expecting into that list at the last minute, and you can tutor it up with your commander and a couple of treasures.
I've even seen Maskwood Nexus go into some of these lists, and that's the first thing that they'll target is Maskwood Nexus, and then they have access to the entire toolbox of creatures in their deck.
Yep.
So,
yeah, and you can easily go infinite as well with that if you get like a Zorn in play with one of those artifact dwarves. And then it's your entire deck. It's just flip it over. It's in play.
Yeah.
And so this is one of the things that I think is an interesting point to talk on is when we're looking at an enclosed group of 32. We know that this is a group of 32. We all know the quality of the players we're playing against, right? Everybody's familiar for the most part with what they're playing against. And compare that to an open tournament like Marchesa, where you don't know all 100 players, you don't know what they're bringing, you might not be familiar with everything. I mean, a great example of that is like Charles on Heliod. I mean, it's the OG Heliod, so I'm sure everybody who sat down across from him was like, what the hell is happening right now?
The amount of time the announcers had to say, this is not the 3-mana Heliod that you think it is.
Yeah, this is not Sun-Crowned.
This is not Sun-Crowned. This is
not Ballista.
Heliod, God of the Sun. And that's it's one of those things where I wonder if, and I'm not saying the deck isn't going to be good in the MLC. I think it will be fine in the MLC, and especially because of what you were bringing up, where you can just layer it so many different ways. I'm curious if it will not be able to get the same under the radar status, right? Where it can sit back and let other people fight over other stuff and then just kind of fall into wins sometimes. You know what I mean?
Not after winning 2 huge tournaments. It's no longer under the radar. Certainly not.
Exactly.
But, I think it's one of those decks that will still probably get ignored a certain percentage of the time and be able to sneak a win even in the very tight MLC playing field. Because, again, it's one of those things where cEDH is like, it's a very complicated game with a ton of decision points. And at any point with the right pilot, you can pivot and win. So, I think that'll still happen, and I think that's going to happen actually with like a fair amount of decks this year, and because I think the pilot skill this year, now that I'm not playing, is very very high. So
I remember there was that real plateau, and then there was Scott, who was like a million miles above everyone else. So, I was really happy to hear that you were bowing out for the sanctity of the tournament and competition.
I didn't want to skew the curve too high. So, I appreciate that.
I appreciate you.
One of the other things that I do want to kind of look at is the other 2 lists there. We know Charles was playing, a Charles deck, right? But now we're looking at 2 different lists here. And one of them, there were 2 Hermit Druid lists that made top 16. One was Reed, Sick Robot, playing Sacred Hermit. And the one that made top 4 is just kind of old school Hermit Druid, Breakfast Hermit. And then when we look at that, I mean, when we look at where people are drafting, and we'll get into this a little bit later on, and the way it's sounding, the first bunch of picks are going to go. I mean, is the likelihood that the Hermit Druid piles go earlier rather than later?
Scott, I mean, I would allow you to speak first as the Hermit Druid person.
Thanks. Yeah, actually, the other day someone referred to me as the Thrasios Timna guy, and I was
Are
like,
they
wait
wrong?
a second.
I'm sorry, are they wrong?
I don't know that they're wrong. Okay?
Yeah,
I
you
have
shocked?
had 3 Thrasios Timna decks assembled at the same time before.
More than 2 is like a notable amount of any
I have
deck.
a Thrasios Timna deck on the database, whatever. Someone the other day was like, oh yeah, the Thrasios Timna guy, ask him. Okay, thanks. So I'll go first as the Thrasios Timna guy. One thing that I've noticed in that like open meta servers, Thrasios Timna Hermit Druid is a very good deck because here's the thing. it's just Oracle Consult mid-range deck, and all of these different Thrasios Tymna decks, whether that be Razikats or even like something like Rector Fit or CST, they're all kind of trying to assemble the same type of game plan.
Right.
And they have other chunks in them that let them pivot to different things. So Hermit Druid, I think, is a really, really good... I feel like Hermit Druid is baby's first Thrasios and Tymna list because you have the option of just playing Oracle Consult, you have the mid-range option, and then you can just put a 2-drop green creature into play and say, if you don't do anything about it, I win the game next turn. Especially with cards like Savine's Wreck and Malevolent Hermit being able to be flashed back into Benevolent Geist, and you've got so many different ways to win the game. I think if someone is unfamiliar with TNT and is picking early and wants a TNT deck, Hermit Druid is probably the first one that they'll take. And I think that the tournament success that Hermit Druid has had just kind of furthers its appeal to people who haven't necessarily played it before but are drafting higher this year. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's an extremely solid pick. It is like the Boomer Jund of the cEDH meta, and just that it's
Which you
extremely
can
solid.
play again in Modern.
Can you? That's fantastic news. I actually
can
love
play
to hear
Boomer
that.
Jund again.
That's lovely to hear. Shout out to Reek
Because
Duke. I'm sure he's
Luris is
excited.
gone, you can play Boomer Jund. Yeah.
But yeah, it's just completely rock solid. It does the thing. It's got tons of value just from side to side. It's a really good pick. I feel like it is perhaps under-respected in the current meta. There is certainly like people out there who are just like of the opinion that any dork deck is just like a little bit too slow, which like they're not completely wrong about. Like the Grixis X decks are very fast and they don't need dorks. But those decks are still, they're putting in tons of work, and there's still plenty of value to be had in those decks, obviously, because it's just a mirror with extra frills on the end of it.
With extra steps.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just a little splash of Celestia.
Well, and it's also important to note, and I think we saw this last year, one of the things that we kind of thought going in was you were going to see a lot of those turbo lists doing really well early on in the turn order. And then we saw that just not be the case whatsoever. Because the turn order, the turbo lists actually did better later in turn order last year, which was hilarious. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I mean, the MLC meta is very different from, an open tournament meta. All the decks that are available. They're most, and you look at the database, which is what a lot of this is based on. That they're very dork heavy, very mid rangey on the database.
And the pilots as well. The matchups. I mean, that's a big advantage too.
Absolutely.
Knowing who you're sitting down across from in an open tournament versus the league environment. Big difference.
Yeah.
So here's ultimately, there you can hear my voice is still not completely back. Here's what I want to do now. Let's take a look at the first 10 picks of the draft. And just to remind you, the first 10 picks in this draft are in order: Nick, Predatory Pickle, Dr. Michael Levine, Mana Dork from Puerto Rico, Mord, picking 5th is Cobblepot, 6th is Claire, 7th is Deco, 8th is Flower, 9th is Veil of Death, and 10th is Ryan from Oregon. And the big thing that we know here is, so we're pretty confident Nick is going to be picking Magda number 1, but we talked about this a little bit off the air, Chris, and we do have some information from the Dr. Michael Levine camp where it does sound like there is a particular mono white commander that's not going to go in the second pick.
Dear God, I hope not.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I'd really like to see Heliod go early too, based on the performance from Marchesa, but who knows? I mean, like I had a tough time pinning down a lot of these picks because in a post Marchesa world, everything's been turned upside down. We made our picks 2 weeks ago, and the scene has changed essentially. So many players have the Marchesa experience backing their picks now. We had so many people picking Comfort drafts early. When the three of us discussed last time, it was, hey, people are going to go with what they've got reps in. People are going to go with what they're familiar with. People are going to go with their pet decks. Now, there's a distinct advantage that's seen from going with these fringe lists that nobody's played against, that nobody knows what's coming. And having that unknown factor in your back pocket is going to be a huge advantage. Yeah. We've seen it steal wins. Going with some of the new lists that people can draft with brand new commanders, brand new strategies, not knowing what vector they're working on, that's enough to win people rounds. That's enough to win matches here. And my entire top 10 pick has been anything could happen.
Right.
Anything. I could make these predictions. We could sit down and Nick could not pick Magda first, right? Now that Magda's a known quantity, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, that's definitely, in talking with Nick when he was trying to figure out what he was going to pick first, Elsha was the other deck in the conversation, because that's his other best deck. So we could see the big curveball from Nick. I haven't heard anything about it, but what if he does?
Right.
I would hope to see
how does that
a more
impact
than
the top 10
pick as the first pick.
Because here I think like pretty much I've seen the three of your mock drafts and they all have, I think, more taking Elsha, but how does the top 10 get messed up if Nick pulls Elsha first?
Well, I have a report here from the hot off the press.
Whoa!
It was really steaming. They had to wave it.
I have a report here. This is actually
put along a ticker on the bottom.
I can't actually show.
Beep, beep, beep.
The closest piece of paper I had was from the IRS, so I actually can't show that. But
just dox yourself right away.
I was going to say self-tell Callahan getting audited right now.
My social security number's crap. You'll be helping me anyway.
Credit can't get worse, right?
So biggest news that we got from Marchesa was in discussing things with Dr. Levine, as it does sound like he is planning on taking Winota for that second draft pick. And it sounds like that's a pretty solid pick. There is some concern from what I've discussed and heard that if he takes that Charles will take Heliod on the back end, but also in talking with Charles sounds like he's pretty okay with not drafting Heliod also. So it's very interesting because so right now I'm looking at my top 10. And
is Charles going to put out a 72 tweet thread about why he's not going to pick?
It's just going to get progressively longer and longer and longer.
It's actually it's 69
the last tweet
this
will
time.
just say
69. Paired it back a little bit.
I mean, to Charles' point there, like you know, you can pretty confidently think that besides Michael, who is going to pilot that deck well enough to like make it worth it to even devote your choice to that. Mm-hmm. Like, you might be afraid of Michael taking that deck and doing very well with it. But I mean, honestly, I feel like Michael is like also just going to try to pick more aggressive decks, even if that is his pet deck. I mean, Michael's a really good player and he definitely knows how to rock a table with a variety of things. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. And so, you know, my prediction there is it sounds like Winota is probably going there. I could also see. I don't think it's unprecedented that Michael will take something like Najeela if he really wants to shake things up. But I think he really wants Winota because it is, and this is a direct quote from him. Hold on, let me get my paper back here. It is a direct quote from him. It is the best stacks deck in the format. So
I'm inclined to agree. I think.
Yeah,
it's got a good track record.
I would say in the MLC, I'm curious if it's the best one or if if there's another really good stack deck out there. There's a lot of stack deck in this field.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it's certainly it's up there as one of the better ones. There are many good ones, and I shouldn't be so quick to say it is like the very best, but I would definitely agree with like top 5 easily.
I think last year we saw a severe limitation of Winota in that the moon effects probably weren't the greatest into the MLC just because there was a a high number of 1, 2, and 3 color decks because last year we just used the cEDH decklist database.
Right.
You can only use the color distributions that are there. So I think Winota was good. I think Winota was good last year, and it went fairly early in the draft. But I think it will require some tailoring to be the best deck in the format for this particular league type of format, for sure.
I think it's going to very much have to be him taking the list and then looking at what are the lists that are in my division, and then kind of tinkering to make it look like play well into that. Because, you know, if you just, I mean, you could take the stock list, but I think that might not. We saw this last year, right, where the stock lists kind of struggled a little bit more.
Yeah, the flexibility of knowing who you're going to be up against in your division and tweaking the lists is going to be wild, because we're going to be able to see a lot of meta calls in here.
Right. At the third pick is Manadork, who is our representative from Puerto Rico. And he is a big fan of Joyra Storm. And I think Joyra is probably where he's going to be going. And, you know, unless you guys have talked with him to get something other than that, it sounds like Joyra is... He very much wants to be in a position where he is comfortable with what he is playing. And I think that is definitely a fair way of taking this draft if you are a new player.
Oh, if you're a new player, especially, you don't want to, like, you know, jump into the deep end right off the bat, especially if you're new to cEDH or new to tournament experiences. It's a lot to take in, and to take a comfort pick, especially if you're like very high up on the list and, you know, you get to get your pick of just about whatever you would like. It makes a lot of sense to take that pick. I think that there are many like seasoned players who would take a different approach than that. I mean, we're just discussing the mono white players not taking the mono white decks and just trying to take something a little bit more favorable. But I mean, there's certainly nothing wrong with taking the comfort picks. It is maybe not the most advantageous way to go about your picks, but it'll serve you for sure. You'll get some points for taking a deck that you know how to play.
Yeah, and keeping in mind that he's picking again early in the second round as well, means that you can grab something comfortable round 1 and then still have your pick of good decks round 2 as well. You can go with something that's just high floor round 2, or you can start grabbing fringe decks that have that advantage of nobody knows how these work.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we saw people try and do that last year. Like Comedian picked Yidris Consult fairly early on, and that deck was kind of an unknown quantity. It had been a known cEDH deck probably a year or two before the MLC happened, and being able to retool it and build it the way that he wanted because of the building restrictions last year, you know, it ended up working out. It's a really cool deck, and I think we're gonna see that. I think we're going to see that from the really smart people in this draft class. Well, I think you'll see them picking the oddball choices that are like still good, traditionally good, but slightly out of favor. Like you'll see the real sharks this year picking decks like Zur. Yeah. I think Zur is going to be one of those like tactical picks from someone like a Cobblepot or a Sick Robot or something like that.
I could definitely see that.
Right, the ones that are confident enough to retool the deck as well. Like they have the established archetype, and then being able to gut it and retool it for this environment in particular. That's a huge leg up for the people that are builders here.
That was one of the things that I had a conversation with Ian about over the weekend, of how he and I are both kind of in the same position where we think that Zur is going to drop fairly far like it did last year. But, you know, one of his concerns with the deck is, you know, a lack of knowledge on Zur, right? And how to build it and how to play it. And so it is interesting you bring that up, because I do think that somebody like a Cobblepot or a, you know, Sick Robot, somebody like that who been in the cEDH world forever, right, will definitely be more comfortable to take those types of lists than somebody like Josh, for instance, who started playing cEDH in December 2020. So there's certainly some of that at play there.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm interested in, Scotty, is moored here at 4. Now, we're all kind of pretty confident that if things go at, insert Joker meme here, all according to plan, that when it comes to moored, it's going to be Elsha top. But let's say things go off the rails. Nick throws us a curveball and takes Elsha round 1. Or really anybody in front of Moored takes Elsha, right? Where do you think Moored falls on this then? Because that's his deck, and where do you go from there?
So I know where I would go from there, and I do not have, I guess, much experience with Moored, but I know if I were an Elsha top player and someone drafted Elsha top before I could, I would go with either, because you're drafting at number 4 and it seems like Magda is going number 1, I would just grab Blue Farm, because that is Jeskai plus black and plays similar Breach play patterns and has a similar Stormy feel. Or if you're hell-bent on getting Jeskai, you can get Jeska Ishai or Hinata, and you maintain those same kind of Breach play patterns that you're comfortable with, which is what I would do for my number 1 pick. I would take the best deck with the same play patterns.
Yeah. Does that mean that Moored is grabbing the reality chip in like round 3 or 4?
Well, only if Jim doesn't take the beloved octopus. There is the chance that Jim just takes the beloved octopus. And the thing that we have to really be cognizant of is the fact that Rebel is random picking.
Yeah.
So who knows?
She's not the only
what
one
happens after round 1. What?
Is she the only one this year who's random picking? I feel like there's maybe one other person who said that they would.
There might be one other person.
I might be thinking of Ian, who did last year.
Ian didn't random pick. Phoenix let chat pick for him.
Okay.
That's what it was.
Yeah, Phoenix. Phoenix let chat pick for him.
So he it wasn't random, but he definitely had outside assistance, so it were
assistance with heavy air quotes on that one.
anything after round 1 is like totally buck wild.
Yeah,
right. I'm saying anything after the first 5 picks, like everybody's wants are going out the window here.
Yeah.
Like again, we can predict this and we can predict the top 10 here, but like the first 3 people pick something that we aren't predicting and it cascades through the rest of round 1.
Absolutely.
Well, and one very important pick here is going to be one Cobblepot, who I absolutely no clue what he's going to draft. He's saying on Twitter at Lapolani, and I will eat my shorts if that's actually what he is doing, because that is. I remember having this. I was standing in the parking lot outside of Mock's boarding house with Shaper, and we're talking about this, and Shaper just goes, "Cobble, I love you, but I've been trying to make that deck work for 3 years. It just don't work."
Yeah.
So, but it's I can't get a read on where Cobblepot's coming from. I have a sneaking suspicion that it might be Thrasios Krark based on some of the recent stuff he's been playing and brewing and showing us on Twitter. I think Derevi is
Arkashimor of Armor.
Yeah, like there's a lot of those things where it's like you have no idea where Cobble's going to go. So like my best guess is Thrasios Krark, but like
Cobble is one of those players who could pick anything.
Yeah.
And just be a great pilot or completely rewrite the deck in between draft and playing it as well. And he'd be one of the ones that I'd be confident to completely retool a list, keep it within the spirit, but show up to the table with a completely unknown vector.
I'm going to get
Locking
the
in
submission
Gamer
from
Pirates.
Cobble, and it's going to say, now hear me out.
How loosely do I have to fit in this archetype?
Like, hear me out. This fits in, but you got to look at it from this angle. And it's like, all right.
It's gonna give you a deck list and a dissertation.
Also, coming in at 6th, we know Claire intends to, if it gets to her, take Karkashima, which, okay, this is going to be I kind of want to touch on this a little bit. This was a big pain point from the tournament of Marchesa, is how brutally awful the Krark Sakashima games were for literally everybody involved.
I heard some things.
I only saw Ken tweet his offer for free assistance to teach people how to play Krark.
Literally nobody.
Yeah.
I think Hal was the most experienced pilot on that there, and I love you, Hal. Hal made tons of mistakes with it, resolving the triggers, where I'm like, I don't know if anybody quite knows how to resolve these triggers correctly.
I think the 75-minute timer pressure at Marchesa really put like a huge pressure on the pilots, and it's the same timer in MLC.
It's 90 minutes, or it's 100 minutes. Excuse me,
100 minutes. Yeah. Okay, so a little bit more time to work out your lines, and a little bit more time to roll with the non-deterministic punches. I mean, I heard tale of the apocryphal 50-minute Krark turn after turns had been called in a conquest game of Karkashima.
Wow.
At Marchesa.
Yes, that did happen.
So I've heard that there was some wild things going on with Karkashima, but I think the thing that'll be different about the MLC compared to Marchesa and Krark Sakashima is that these people have 2 months to get ready. Like at this point, they've known they're playing for this long. The draft is soon, but like in a fair amount of time.
And then they'll have a month
starts.
after the draft,
Yeah.
right? You know,
and then there's a month after the draft for them to get ready. So if they need to test the deck, if they need to learn the lines, they have hundreds of hours. And if they don't know them, it's their own fault.
Right.
Right?
I mean, speaking on Hal's behalf, I know that he was only playing Krark and Sakashima for like, I think 5 weeks before Marchesa. It was a very
he was the best Karkashima player
he's an
in that
extremely
field.
Great pilot. Yeah,
Like,
he's very gifted.
It was.
But, I also know
it was
that
just
Hal
a
likes
very
to, have fun and turn up. So sometimes we have sloppy day 2s or even day 1s.
Yeah. Well, and so one of the things that will be important to know is that we are going to have a dedicated person on staff with the Karkashima calculator.
That's great.
Running it for them. That is IMOC's job.
Wow.
IMOC's job for the tournament, or for the entire league, is that if somebody is playing Krark, IMOC is running the Karkulator app for that person. Because it is an open source app. So we had this huge long meeting about, do we want to allow Krark? Do we want to allow them to use the Karkulator? And if so, how do we do it? And so IMOC's job is to literally, Krark is being played. I'm sitting in the VC of that pod and running the Karkulator app for them.
Well, yeah, that's what I was thinking is the big difference between even just playing Krark in non-tournament and tournament settings is that when you're in a non-tournament setting, you reveal the Gataxian Probe or the Jeska's Wheel, and you ask if everyone wants to scoop it up. And if your opponents know enough about Krark and Sakashima, they say, yes, that's good enough. But you can't just do that in a tournament setting because you have no idea what the actual win condition is. So you really do have to, the Karkulator is a very good tool to be able to pick up the pieces there and be able to speed that up and make it a lot smoother and thankfully make it a lot more possible. Because I can imagine just the logistical nightmare of trying to judge Krark and Sakashima in a tournament setting.
Yeah, at Marchesa, I think I said this to Nick, but I'm like, it literally anytime there's a Krark player, you almost have to have a dedicated judge at the table.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%.
Oh yeah,
because it's one of those things where I'm sorry,
there's
Scott.
so much storm math.
Yeah.
It's
one of those things where on the other side of the coin of not knowing a deck is not knowing a deck well enough or just having interacted with it enough, and that's something that Krark and Sakashima always has, where people have either not played against it enough or not quite there on exactly how to interact with it, and you really got to know how to interact with it.
For the players who are playing at home and you see Krark and Sakashima in your local meta, here is a quick hot tip from your good friend Callahan. Just remove the Krark. Don't let it resolve.
You know what? Volcanic
I mean?
Fallout. That's a card that will make a Krark player cry.
Don't ever let it resolve.
Also, don't listen to Ken. Never.
Yeah.
Don't listen to Ken.
Well, no, Ken is very
Krark.
forthcoming with like how to defeat the deck, but not when you are playing a game with him. Do not listen to any of the bullshit that Ken says to you. Other players in the MLC are speaking to you right now. When Ken casts something and he says, "Oh, don't worry, it's just this thing," the next card that he has in his hand is going to make you fucking cry. Am I allowed to swear?
I want to see a
you're
Photoshop
fine.
of Ken's head on Wormtongue's body, just whispering counsel into your ear while he's playing Krark.
Ken is a fucking liar. Everything he says is
Just
bullshit.
If Ken says, "Oh, this deck will function fine without Krark," you can remove the Krark. Don't listen to Ken.
But also remove the Krark.
I remember the good old
Krark
days when
and-
you would steal a Krark from Ken and he would say, "Good, I don't need that."
I don't need that. Yeah.
So looking past Claire, so we've got this top 6. Najila hasn't been taken yet, and we get to Deco, and we have talked with Deco, so we have a little bit of an idea of what he's thinking about. But from what it sounds like, if Najila is not an option, Mad Farm is the backup plan here, which is really interesting.
Millennium cry.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Yeah, he'll be very sad. But I know Deco has lots and lots of hours on that deck. He likes it a lot. It's a very strong deck, and he's a killer pilot. So, I mean, it makes a lot of sense for that to be his backup choice in that scenario.
Mm.
Both hours on both Mad Farm and Florian and other Rakdos Turbonaus lists, which Mad Farm is essentially Rakdos Turbonaus plus some silences, right?
It's
And a Seventh
Rakdos
Rack.
Turbo Nas, but
And Savage Rack, that's true.
but with Timna, like
Yeah. So,
And I think that's the most dangerous of the picks in here is when there's a high value floor deck and a pilot that has the reps
right.
in the deck. Those are the most dangerous first picks that we need to see here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see if somebody takes Najila before Deco, because I think Deco really falls into that Pongo category of like is so experienced on this list, you might not want that person to have that deck.
Yeah.
Yeah, is someone in Deco's division drafting before Deco? That's the real question.
Let me look.
Good question.
Because I don't have
Is
that.
Manadork in the same division as
No, Manadork is in the same division as Killstars. But Claire
in
is
the
picking
same city?
ahead of Deco. Claire, because Claire had to switch over to the Gatewatch. It was originally going to be Hal over there, so those two had to swap divisions. So Claire will pick before Deco. So she could theoretically take Najila, but that does also mean that Ken probably or somebody that's not her is getting Karkashima.
Najila and Claire, both strong woman icons. So
Yes.
I could see
Claire,
that.
I have spoken to personally about it, and I have advised her if it isn't within your power, do not let Ken have the Krark and Sakashima deck because he will absolutely lose to him
that's
every
the
single
thing,
time.
right?
And she seemed pretty determined to pick up Krark and Sakashima as her pick. And of course, anything can happen. We could see Nick first pick Krark and Sakashima. Me and Ken would be cheering.
It's not going to
It
happen.
won't, but
I know that one is not going to happen. I similarly will eat a pair of my shorts. Yeah.
That's two.
Yeah.
That's two on record
Yeah,
for this
it's
podcast
two
alone.
offers of consumption of shorts.
But I know that Claire has also been practicing a lot with a lot of the database decks. She's been playing a lot of Grixis decks, a lot of Urza and things like that. So she's got some other core decks that are like super solid lists that I know that she would feel pretty comfortable first picking if somehow Krark and Sokka doesn't get to her. But it seemed like from our last conversation, at least, that it was pretty firm that was going to be our first pick.
Yeah.
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 Are we
I
still
got the
on
same
that
vibe.
like no Krark lists are going to make it to Ken?
I think
So
Krark gets. I think Ken is going to
Ken
get.
gets Vape Farm.
Yeah.
I think Ken gets Mardu.
I think someone
Krark.
would be foolish to take Vape Farm from Ken. And I think Ken would also be foolish to take Vape Farm. Sorry, Ken.
I think.
I kind of agree.
Yes.
Ken,
I
please don't
think-
take Vape Farm. I'm begging you.
The deck is. We could talk about the inclusion of that deck, but some other time offline.
It's not a bad deck
but-
by any means, but for that to be your first round pick.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Ken.
it's not a first round pick.
Ken could
Look
pick
at
that
Chris's
last
face when I said
pretty
that.
safely.
Yeah.
And that's a Mardu Timna list. So,
But the thing is, the other one is Krark.
It's the Mardu Timnolus not playing Adnos, though, right?
That's true.
So,
I think it is only on Citadel and maybe Pier. But actually, maybe not even Pier.
yeah.
that's hilarious.
It's more of a so for reference, Ken plays like a pretty controlling Marchesa deck, and I think the Timna Krark is kind of like a tuning of that with some Krark play patterns added. So Ken has a really interesting idea of what Mardu can be, and kind of accentuates the control-y elements of it too. So I think that deck is like a Ken thing though.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think if you put that in someone else's hands, they pilot it to near the same efficiency.
You know what?
That Ken would.
I'll say one other person could draft that deck and do okay with it, and that's Cobblepot.
I was just about
He's
to
the
say
only
same
one
thing,
crazy enough to actually be okay with
Yeah,
it.
the thing that I know about Cobble is that he just loves just really complicated and convoluted decks, and that is certainly that's within his realm of experience of playing weird Krark hand disruption.
Dovescape, Kenrith, Advantage Thrasios, and
One of the other people that we kind of were discussing a couple weeks ago here in this back half of this top 10 is Flower. And originally we were all kind of like, well, we know Flower likes Azusa. She's really comfortable on these mono green decks. And then I get word that she is at Marchesa asking Sick Robot to teach her how to play Cody. So it sounds like Scotty's advice came
these
through.
are
I just need to pat myself on the back a little bit here and say that I did say maybe Winota or Cody.
Yeah.
And I'm
these are the girl boss
I'm
moves
so
that you
proud
need
of
to
myself.
make, honestly, these are the kinds of moves that you want to see players making. I'm comfortable on this monocolor deck, but Cody's it's Cody. So why not try to pick that as
Cody
my
is
first
Cody.
pick? I have
It's
the
really
pleasure of
hard to
being
mess
right.
up Cody.
Yeah,
Like
Cody is a deck that dumpsters tables.
it's straightforward.
Is
It's
fun
fast.
to play.
Yeah, it's just it's gonna get
for only
Yeah.
you to play.
That's okay. It's a league. It's okay. Your job is not to make everyone else have fun. Your job is to dumpster
Yes,
them.
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. And you can play one for fun afterwards if you want to. There's no rules. Got a whole ass time.
You can play fun games.
Can do a round 2 off the books. Sure.
Have some fun.
It's interesting though. So Cody is kind of where I think she's leaning. I know she had like a handful of lists she was talking about over the weekend that she was like, I want to get, she's very much in the where Rebel was last year of going to the people who make those lists and being like, hey, how do I play this? What do I do? Flower, if you're listening, that is 100% how you succeed in this format.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Talk to people who know
That's the
more than
move.
you do about Magic, and they will teach you about it. Especially in
Yeah.
cEDH, people
Always.
love to talk about
Yeah.
their decks in particular, like their
Oh,
own
yeah.
decks. They would love to tell you anything about it.
Yeah.
I would hope that the performance of monocolored decks at Marchesa over the weekend bolster Flower's confidence with some of those mono green picks that she was bandying about too.
Yeah.
But I think also you can safely say that I'll probably get a mono green deck pick too.
Right.
She's picking real early
Yeah,
pick
like-
too. Like, it's not inconceivable by a long shot.
Like I don't know. There's a world where Higher picks Silvala in the first round, right?
I gotta
like,
think he's going Kinnan mid range.
Oh, Scotty
Here's
arguing
the
with that
thing.
one.
Well, okay, so here's the thing. Hire's drafting at like 27, 28.
he is drafting 29th.
29th. So the thing is, Hire is a very good Selvala pilot and probably wants to make sure that he gets that deck. If Kinnan mid-range falls down to 29, I think he'll probably end up taking that. But I see a world in which Hire nabs Selvala to prevent it from going into round 2, because
That makes a lot of
Selvala
sense.
is a deck that if you cast Selvala turn 2, you try to win on turn 3 every single game you play with Selvala. It just always does the thing.
That's reminds me of games that I've played with Lavinia where I've had people, going after me in turn order who kept like no land hands, and I turn one of Lavinia and they're like, oh, I can't play now. I'm like, my deck does one thing.
You knew what Lavinia turn 1. Yeah. You played Jeweled Lotus in that deck to make sure you had more turn 1 Lavinias.
The deck has one trick, okay?
It's a turn. If you mulligan to Mana Crypt and Mox Diamond, that's your own dang fault.
So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But I mean, there's also Marwyn, which is very similar to Selvala. It has a lot of the same play patterns. Yeah. Yisan is another list. It's a little bit more toolboxy, though, not as much of a like.
So we saw Hal take Yisan last year, and I think round 3.
It was round 3, I believe. Yeah,
And I think that there is some leaning from Millennium's camp to try and take Yisan in a particular in like a similar spot.
I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's a pod player, so it makes sense. That's certainly within his wheelhouse.
So
I think if you want Yisan, you better get on it before Hal drafts.
And there's also a good thing to note here is outside of Yisan, all of the mono green decks pretty much play around the same axis, right? Mm-hmm. Titania and Ashaya are not vastly different than Marwyn and Selvala. In fact, I don't have the list memorized and right in front of me, but I'm almost 90% sure both of them play Selvala.
They play they just play the other mono green combos inside.
So it's one of those things where I think it's, Flower, I think, can just pick high EV choices and then whatever green deck is left, go for that because, she's really outside of Higher. In Higher really only likes Selvala. So outside of, that, the only one who's going to be going after those.
Fair.
As far as we know. One of the things that will be interesting to see down here at 9th, we did get to have a little bit of a conversation with Veil of Death. And Death does have some particular cards that he likes to play. The biggest of which he is a big fan of the Tevesh style decks. Mm-hmm. So Tevesh Thrasios, Tevesh Tana. I'm trying to think of what are some of the other ones. There's like Tevesh Ishai.
He does a Tevesh Crom, I think, as well. He's actually a patron of mine, so I've played a few.
Tevesh Crom is not in the format.
Oh, there's no Tevesh Crom.
No Tevesh Crom this year. Armix Crom this year instead of Tevesh Crom.
And that is the deck that if it gets to him, when I discussed things with Death, it sounds like Armix Crom is the choice, which we saw top 16 Marchesa. Like it is. I lost to it was my own damn fault that I lost to it, but Armix Crom on stream.
Who was playing it?
Sean from Mr. Morris.
Shawnee?
No.
Oh, nice. Sean.
Yeah.
Sean from Mr. Morris. Nice.
He played an opposition agent in response to my Spellseeker, and I forgot that Spellseeker is a May.
He's a May.
And he won with my demonic consultation that I gave him.
It's a good card.
Because I'm an idiot. So if you're around and you've been seeing my face of Josh with Spellseeker as a May, when you remember Spellseeker's a May ability, that's what that's in reference to. That kept me out of top 16, friends and family.
Nice.
But so there's, Armix Crom, and this is kind of something we talked about a little bit before. Is this kind of the new hotness right now? Is this Armix Crom deck that Mikey's been?
It's certainly like the flavor of the month. Not to take anything away from the deck in particular. I played Mikey playing this deck plenty of times. Mikey's a great pilot, so obviously he's going to do very well. But it's a very well constructed deck. It works on really good pivot points. It's got some really unique control pieces like Wandering Archaic in it. It's a really solid deck, I think, honestly. It plays really well, and especially into the sort of environment where you are worried about Nagilas, Winotas, and things like that. Having that removal in the command zone is really, really nice.
I had another boneheaded play against both of my really boneheaded plays in that tournament came against Armix Crom, and I had Swan Song in hand, and they go to cast Dark Ritual, and I'm sitting there, and somehow I let Cal from playing with power talk me into this is it might be like an ad nauseum. I'm like, yeah, it's probably an ad nauseum main phase. No, it was a Bolas' Citadel, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, I should have countered goddamn.
You can't Swan Song that.
So all of my boneheaded plays from this tournament were against Armix Crom.
I think that there are a fair amount of decks with that kind of Dimir / Grixis core that are just a large amount of very good cards with some minor synergies built in. So I think like Armix Crom is a really good one to draft in that spot. And I think if Armix Crom somehow doesn't fall to death, like you've got like Kess.
Yeah.
And Jaleva and Timnacrom.
Nala, if you have the
Nala Spellseeker, right?
Yeah.
There's
I know that also on their radar is 4-color Luris, which is in my opinion, if you're trying to do the turbo Nas thing in 4-color or in Sans Green, then it's like I think that's the better way to go in my opinion because it's so low to the ground. It's just so fast.
You do lose out on the Rhystic Studies and the Ranger Captains of the world, though, which are hits for sure.
You do, but I think one of the soapbox time. We've discussed that we have Blue Farm listed as a mid-range deck. That's because Farm in our category classification is listed as kind of like a newer version of these mid-range ad-nause lists that we used to get, right? They're these they're creature-heavy ad nauseum lists. And those tend to be they're Timna creature-heavy ad nauseums. And those tend to be more mid-rangey than other things. And there is a vast opinion, Rebel and I have talked about this ad nauseum, no pun intended. Actually, all the pun intended, excuse me.
I was going to say, Scott's got my favorite.
Is that people kind of play Blue Farm in the wrong way, which is that they try to play it like it's a turbo deck where it's really just this high EV, it can
every
go.
Card is good.
All the cards are good, where it's really just
very
a
high floor.
Yeah. And why I tend to be like, if you want to play 4-color Turbo Nas, you should play Baby Blue Farm because that's the one that actually does go really fast.
That's the faster of the two. Yeah.
And it's
actually.
Oh, go ahead. No, I was just going to say that it actually is built to support going really fast like that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And it's same when personally with my cast deck, I don't run the Fierce Guardianship and the Deflecting Swat just because when you lose out on those chunkier pieces, it's a lot easier to go fast and put your head down and kind of get there.
Right.
I think there are going to be many times in this league where you're going to need to pivot to those longer games where the things like Rhystic Study especially really help out a lot. But I certainly agree with you. Yeah, the Baby Blue Farm is the optimal way to go quite fast in those 4 colors.
I think Baby Blue Farm is a really neat deck, but it's one of those decks that I read a conversation today about how Farm has lost all of its meaning and how basically the origin of Farm was quote unquote a River May Cry written fan fiction about Timna and Bruce. And that's where Farm came from. So as long as you write a fan fiction in your primer equivalent to that, you can call your deck Farm. Was the discussion that I read just today. I think we have kind of slipped away from the idea of Farm meaning somewhat like zoo. That kind of same meaning, accruing value off of creatures and Timna and that kind of thing. So Baby Blue Farm, 4C Luris, whatever.
I just call it 4-color Turbo Nas. 4-color Luris Turbo
That's a
Nas.
good. There you go. That's a good name for it.
Because it's really not a farm deck, exactly like you were saying, and I think Blue Farm does fall into that farm category, but it's not like people hear farm and are like farm has to go fast. And it's like, no, it's just a different way of playing mid-range ad-nause. And
it's crude value over time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things where to your point is the definition of what farm is people are like, oh, it's a turbo deck. And it's a mid-range list, my friend. And that is, I think Rog Silas is what ruined the name farm because everybody called Rog Silas a farm deck when it's really not a farm deck even in the slightest. And they're like, well, you're farming Rograk. No, it's a turbo list.
No,
Technically,
sacrifice
you are
the
right
Roadrak
in
turn
that
1
definition.
to a color
Yeah,
and then you win the game. That's a farm deck.
It's called murder nods, right? Like, I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's murder nods.
Agreed.
We can't all be Pongo and just have the nuts on turn 1 on that deck, though. So when we get down to Ryan, I tried to get Ryan to give me any indication of what he will be drafting. And the indication is he's going to take whatever 4-color pile he likes the most when it gets to him.
That would be my strategy too. I understand that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a perfectly valid strategy to
I
take.
think that's one of the best strategies, if not the best to have, honestly.
Yeah. And there's a lot of, you know what, I kind of suspect Razakats might get picked there. But like you always said, like it could be any of them, and it really might just depend on where Ryan is sitting and, how he's reading the room.
Who in his division is picking before him?
That is a good question. Let me look at Ryan's division, and nobody is picking before him. So he is picking the first there out of that.
So he's really setting the tone for that division with first pick.
Yeah, his division is Sage, Ken, Hire, and those are the 4 there. And that's the Coalition West.
Yeah, that's a good division there. But when you've got your pick of anything, and we had predicted a lot of people going with comfort picks here, that means that when you're picking 10, there's going to be a lot of just generally good stuff available to you. And if you're comfortable piloting anything, you just take the best of whatever comes to you in that position, and you're sitting pretty.
Yeah.
So if I'm him drafting in 10th there, I am taking something like Razakats or Hermit Druid if you're going for that kind of thing. Because the picks that I think you're going to see really early are Sage taking Omnath for Sea Breach.
Or Valky.
Hire
It could be either
taking-
that or Valky.
I think Sage has said they're taking Omnath.
I know that they have been
because
exclusively practicing with
on the
Omnath.
moderately anonymous stream, they did say, I'm testing out my first pick in the MLC Draft, Omnath for
And then they
Color
didn't play
Breach.
anything else.
And then they played nothing but Omnath. So I think it's a fairly set in stone that they'll be.
And that's what they said
Omnath.
when I reached out last time as well, that 4C Omnath was their first pick there, with Valky coming in second. And I think Valky's going to be able to go like third too.
And after that, I think you're going to see Hire taking either Kinnan mid-range or Kenrith mid-range. And then Ken will pilot anything well, realistically, but I think Ken has more of a mid-range bent traditionally. So I think if you're Ryan, you're trying to set the tone, you want to take I think Omnath is going to get played 3 times or whatever the max is.
3.
Yeah. Kenrith will get played 3 times. So you want to take the deck that will play into that pod.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be interesting to see how that works out. Here's what I want to talk about. There's 2 more things I want to touch on before we wrap things up today. One is, what does Jim do here at 12? Because I've talked to Jim a lot. I know Chris has talked to Jim a lot, and I know that there's a lot of things that Jim is looking at. And right now, when we're looking at what Jim is feeling, because I know we're kind of memeing about, the reality chip, but I know that the reality chip is not on his radar as a first round pick. So, what, as far as what's coming out from the Spike Feeders camp, what are you hearing of so far, Chris?
Well, as of today, at time of recording, they have just released a video where Jim is on Mind Sculptor.
Okay.
Oh.
And that did top 16 Marchesa.
So I would look at that because Jim has reps with it.
Yeah,
I think it's a bold choice
as well. Yeah.
Yeah. But
it's one of those Rector style Hulk
count
lists. I'm all here for it.
It's very good. If you've ever been beaten by one, it's a difficult deck to interact with once they're doing the thing.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
But I would say he's looking at that very highly, and we had a talk last night as well where the Greasefang list is very high on his picks too, but I'd expect that around 2 rather than around 1.
You would think so, yeah. But Jim's a real wild card, honestly. He loves his off-meta decks. He definitely doesn't want to pick up a consultation deck. Although, I don't know, maybe he puts that aside for just the competition aspect of it all and just goes for something really strong. I kind of doubt it, but it's it's not impossible.
I think he's going to pick something that he has the reps in, that he has the practice with. And I think that Mind Sculptor ranks high up there.
Is there room within the brewing restrictions for Jim to port bears in cars into Tevesh Ishai? Like, can we just have Tevesh Ishai bears in cars?
If he can manage to make it a humility mid-range ad nos list, then sure. Like,
you can pilot
I don't see why not. That
flagship
actually
with
sounds
someone.
incredible into humility.
I mean, that just means that he needs humility and ad nos in there. The rest of it can be whatever.
Yeah,
right?
that's all that it means,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it doesn't have to cast them.
well, and that's so. Next question I have is where is Shorakai going? Because I know we've talked about how Shorakai is this really. I guess I'm asking 3 questions here, so bear with me. Shorakai is the hot new commodity. It didn't get a ton of play at Marchesa, but we know that it's been doing the rounds in the streaming meta. We know that it's been doing the rounds in the online meta. So do we think Shorakai... I mean, Shorakai surely is a first round pick, right?
Honestly, all of my experiences against a Shorakai deck is them mulling very low and not being able to recover well from it. I haven't seen it perform extremely well. So, I mean, like, no knock against, like, any of the people who are thinking about it and piling it. I haven't had any experiences sitting across from it that made me think it was a very good pick. I wouldn't have thought, from my experiences with it, that it's a good round 1 pick.
Interesting.
I think that it's new and it's interesting, but I don't think that a lot of people have the reps with it right now or the familiarity level with it right now to pick it this highly.
It's a very particular
I could see it going
deck.
late round 2.
Yeah.
I could see it going early round 3. But this early in round 1 or in round 1 at all, probably not likely unless Rebel randoms it.
That's always
possible.
a possibility, right?
Definitely
Yeah,
possible.
asterisk next to this whole episode.
Yeah. I think Shorakai's probably going like mid round 2, late round 2, early round 3, somewhere around there.
Scott,
I recently saw some discussion about Shorakai, actually, where it was stated, and I think this is particularly insightful. It has all the pitfalls that you get from playing blue-white, but almost none of the advantages that you get from playing traditional blue-white commanders, like Grand Arbiter or Lavinia.
Yeah.
You don't get that Staxy element to it, so it is a deck where you are required to both keep stacks pieces and card advantage pieces in your openers to get off the ground, which is particularly difficult. Paying 4 mana for your commander and tapping out is like not necessarily where you want to be. And the activation cost is 1 mana. So even with your Jeweled Lotus land to start out, you don't have your card advantage engine running until turn 2.
right? Fair.
So it requires, I think, a pretty high amount of pilot skill.
Yeah.
And it requires really good mulliganing instincts. I still think it's a great deck. It's a Scepter deck that can play Humility and has access to all of the
and
great
is also
counter
a
magic and interaction.
Poly-Tyrant deck.
Yeah,
which is insane.
And has access to all the great
Like-
counter magic and interaction of blue-white, but it does take a little bit to get off the ground. So I think, like Chris was saying, I think we'll see
So
late round 2, early round 3 type of Shorakai pick.
I don't
it's-
think anybody has the reps with it yet to
I think
to comfortably
Cobblepot
pick it early.
would potentially pick it. It is one of
I
the.
think it's a deck
see
that
that,
Cobble
yeah.
could pick.
It's one he's been
Yeah.
brewing a lot, and so I could see him taking it. I don't know if he's taking it round 1, but
No, I'd see that probably as Cobble's round 3 pick then.
yeah,
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
very
he's
interesting
picking
because when I
fifth,
talked to like Ian is expecting that like it's a deck that he would like to play, and he's not
Yeah.
expecting to even get to sniff it round 1.
I mean, so there's the deck is like extremely hyped. It's a very cool new card, and when it gets going early, it destroys tables because it can play every stacks piece that hoses everything that you do, but draws 2 cards every turn. Like, there's a lot to be said about that. So it's very cool, but it's one of those decks where, like Mod was saying, like Dan was saying, if you mulligan poorly, you just
Well,
you don't play the game. You don't have a good game.
Here's one of the things that, as a control player, first of all, I think it's a control deck, not a stack deck.
Oh, absolutely is, yeah.
And this is why I think people are running into that issue, is they're trying to play it like a stack deck, and you're going to find out real fast that that's not called. You have to play it like a control deck.
You got to keep some weird sixes sometimes. It's definitely not a thing where you can mulligan and reload, because you do have to play Table Police playing that deck.
Yep. And that's one of those things where I know Mikey and I have had this discussion before, where there's like two different philosophies on how you mulligan. And you have like the Mikey, like philosophy of you mulligan really aggressively because that's like how you get the best opening hands and get off the ground really well. And then you have like the me philosophy of this is a good 7. I'm playing.
Keep a good hand.
I want to have. And the reason I say this, especially in colors like blue, white, where you don't have as easy access to great card advantage, you keeping okay hands is oftentimes better than keeping really gas for card hands. You know what I mean? Because like you're going to be able to sustain that over a long period of time, because the whole point of playing these control things is controlling the board. And guess what? You can't do that if you don't have cards in hand.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I actually hear if you're a master tactician, you can win off of just a City of Brass. So
I had to mull down to only the City of Brass, though. That's the difference, is you can't mull down to only City of Brass in your Shorkai deck, because that's not going to work out.
No, probably not. Yeah.
The last question I have here is, when we look at the Coalition North, which is the very highly anticipated Hell Division of Ian, Pongo, Reed, and Morgan. Yeah. Everybody.
That's wow, what a great name.
We were sitting in our Airbnb, and I'm sitting here with Reed and Morgan and Shaper, and Shaper's asking, and Ian is literally on the opposite side of the house, basically in the kitchen, but it's like an open concept, whatever. And Shaper's just like, so how did you get all 4 of them in the same division? You just hear Ian shout from the other side of the room, it's because he hates me.
Gerrymandering. That's how you end up with all 4 of them in the same division.
So that was, but with that knowledge there of that 4 pod is going to be quite difficult to come out of. Picking first out of those 4 is Spleenface at number 20. And I mean, both he and Reed brought Sacred Druid to Marchesa, so I think it will be interesting to see and they pick back to back. So I think those 2 are going to set the tone for that division real fast. On what they're picking.
For sure. Yeah, and whichever one of them, I know last year, one of them took mid-range Sans White, and the other one took Hermit Sans White, like right in a row. I think they both basically picked the same deck 5 times or 4 times or whatever, because they test against each other, they play games against each other, and I have a feeling it's going to come down to them counter-picking each other, and then every game is going to be that one meme where the dude bro has his arm around the girl with his hand out like he's explaining something, but it's going to be like Pongo and Ian are the girl.
No, have you not seen the spleen-splained meme?
I did see the spleen-splaining meme, yeah. I seriously, I love both of those guys. They're great guys. But gosh, it will be long games.
Yeah, that division is going to be crazy.
They're going to be long.
The pod familiarity in that division there alone is going to dictate so much of how those games go.
Yeah, we're going to hit the timer a few times, I think.
I would suspect so, yeah.
I think so.
Lots of politics and lots of discussions.
About, so we kind of have an idea of, like, I expect that if we get to Adam Sliverboy, he's going to take Jessica E. Shy if it's available. And then round 2, he'll probably take Arden or Arden Crom if that's available, because he and I I said this on the last episode, but like his version of Jessica Ishai and my version of Arden Crom are like a handful of cards different. So they're like effectively the same decks with different. I might be incorrect, but I think his list of Jessica Ishai has Arden in the 99.
That seems like an
so
Adam
like
move.
yeah. So like I fully expect him to go, if Jessica Ishai is not available, just go right for Arden Crom, because he basically already plays that deck. But so then you get to like Josh and Killstars and Kai and Fukins and Ken and Pontus pick before Spleen. And it's really interesting because I know Pontus is looking at, a lot of 4-color piles. I know Fukins is looking at a lot of stuff, but Fukins is also, do we think Fukins might take Godo round 1? Because we know that's what Fukins is very comfortable on. He is a Godo pilot.
Godo's a very good deck. I would think that, like, in just terms of drafting, I would put that in the category of my mind of something that I could safely leave for a round 2 pick. But I don't know. People will definitely take some interesting choices. We've already discussed this.
I know Hokie kind of got bullied into picking it round 1 last year.
But he did very well with it. He took a lot of turn 1 wins, didn't he?
He was 3-0 with it.
Yeah.
He didn't lose a single game with it.
But still, it's one of those decks is if somebody stops your line, you just stop playing.
Yeah.
Depending on which particular line you go for, there are some definite, just stop dead in your tracks so you don't get to do anything anymore. I've treasonous ogred my way down to 3 life.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's going to depend on when it's being picked and what in the division is picked before it too. Yeah. Because you don't want to play like a Godo into a control heavier pawn, right? That's the last thing that you want to do. So I think that's going to depend. I think that it'd be a bold first round pick.
Yeah.
Like Dan said, I think round 2 it'd be a lot safer. So
yeah. Well, we are here towards the end of the episode, and so this is going to come out here on Monday. And the draft is going to be live on YouTube on the Mind Sculptor's channel on here on Saturday night, April 9th. And I don't know if we'll have an opportunity to get a quick episode in on Sunday, but the next time we talk will be after the draft. So before we step away, just kind of final thoughts on things that kind of expect, Dan, final thoughts here on before we head into this draft.
Everyone think hard about those choices. Don't necessarily take the comfort choices. Definitely utilize the resources around you. Be like Flower. Go up to people, ask them about how their decks work. If you think they got the really good ones, if you got something that you haven't played before, study your decks, study your opponent's decks. Don't listen to Ken Bauman at all inside of a game. Outside of a game, very trustworthy person. But yeah, just good luck to all the players. I hope that everyone has a really great time with it. I'm very excited for what's coming up.
Chris, your final thoughts here tonight.
We can make these predictions as much as we want, and we've made 2 rounds of these predictions now, and I think between now and the draft, things are going to change entirely again. Like we've had people give us their picks a couple of times now, and it's been mutable, and I think by the time we get to actual draft day, we could see like the first 3 decks picked, and then everything goes out the window.
Yep.
And honestly, I'm living for that. I want to see that. I want to see the chaos sowed immediately. Like we've been saying for 2 podcasts now that Nick's going to pick this Magda first pick. And if he doesn't, I think that's just going to have everybody scrambling.
I think everybody's going to be, if he takes like Najila pick 1, everybody's going to be like, well, shit.
Right. Exactly. And it's going to send ripples through the rest of the draft.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly what I want to see.
Scotty, your final thoughts today.
I kind of have the same thoughts as the other 2 folks. I really think that there is a lot of potential for people picking early in the draft to choose violence and blow everything up. And gosh, do I hope it happens. The other thing is that this is a testament to the reach of the Mind Sculptors podcast that we've talked about these picks in the last episode, and I've heard people discussing how they're going to approach picking based on the information that they gleaned from the last episode, and I'm sure it'll happen again with this one, so hold on to your butts. I honestly don't think we're right. Our top 10, I don't think it's right. I think it's going to change. It is a Schrodinger's cat scenario where we have altered it so we cannot know what its status is until we figure out exactly what it is, until we learn on draft day.
Yeah. It's a Schrodinger's podcast.
Schrodinger's podcast.
Schrodinger's
This is exactly
draft.
what it is. We've changed it. We've offered stimulus to it, so it's gonna change. This is what
I
happened.
wish that I wasn't the
excited.
tournament organizer, because if I wasn't, I would do the Scotty thing where I would offer you $5 if you draft Greasefang in the first 10.
But yeah, you
I can't do
it,
that,
no, unfortunately.
But if you do, I definitely could tell you that you'll get a sturdy hug.
Yeah, there you go. A nice high five.
Nice high
If you're
five.
Hugiverse. Yeah.
If you draft Greasefang in the top 10, I think the deck's so cool. Every time I
go.
pull up a list and start brewing it, I'm just like, oh my gosh, this deck is so cool. But, well, that about wraps things up for us today. Thank you all for joining me today and giving us your perspective on this upcoming draft. Want to give a couple shout outs to some of our higher tier patrons of Justin, Michael Levine, CZ, David Snively, Dionyches, Jason Bialik, Matt Boehner, and Senior Coupon. If you too would like to become a patron and you want to talk to us over in Discord, want to help contribute to not only the podcast but the MLC, you can head on over to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors or check out the link in the description. Thank you again for joining us, and from all of us here at the Mind Sculptors, I'm Callahan, and we'll see you next time.
I'm in line with the stars, I'm in sync with the earth. 10 toes deep, flower child from the turf. I never switch sides, like even when I die, I'ma ride for the squad, ladder ties in the hearse. I've been on the vibe, kinda hard to describe. I'm in between, I'm good and it's fine, but I'm tired of the grind. Then I come alive in the night to realize I'm in the middle of the time of my life. I never so packed for the stack, never lied on the rap. Got a bag from the way that I write it. Queen looking Tyson, do that ass survive, doing 80 to the house. Then I hit it to the sky, change haters on a tirade. Talking to the crib in the face, be still, let that hate stuff fade. We all want the same, we all want a meal in the safe. I wanna live like I'm trying to reach enlightenment. Trail spill from my lips, feel bent from the bib. Take a sip till I pass out. Try and get grit, but it don't make sense, cause you can lose life on this fast route. Yeah, turn thoughts to a cash cow. I might flip that to the glass house. I don't need the accolades, I'm in love with the chase. I just wanna eat, save a spot at the table. Beast with the slap, pin myself on the map. You long with the wind, but we knowing that it's capped. 5-hour flights, couple nights at the flat. To be real, couldn't see me making moves while I'm at. I'm still on the grind, limit time when I chat. I'm burning down sage, keep the demons away. When I write it, give a piece of myself to the page. I don't do it for the praise, love, that's just how I'm made.
Truth in the glass in the mirror.
Yeah.
Do it at me, old man, tryna pass in the fear. You're the first one to talk, but the last one to hear. Eyes blurry, but I couldn't see the